Good evening. Welcome to week 4 of Help, What Do I Do Now series. We'd like to welcome the Threshold Singers and invite you to close your eyes and let the music in.
We are all just walking each other home. 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 Just walking each other home.
Words by Ram Dass and the music by Kate Munger. He started the Threshold Choir some 10 years or 20 years ago. It's been quite a while. There are about 200, oh, that light. Okay. There are about 200 choirs worldwide, about 2,000 singers. And we are the Agate Pass Threshold Choir in North Kitsap. And we have 9 of us here tonight, 9 out of our 14-member choir. So thank you for the invite, Joe and Johanna. We really believe that bringing the conversation around death is critically important. And I know for me, it helps me live with more gratitude and awareness about life. So very valuable, and we're very pleased to be here. So I'm Judy Friesen. I am the director of this choir. We've been meeting for almost 9 years now, every week. But we're a different kind of choir. We don't perform, we offer what we've got. And we sing with intention to bring comfort and make kindness audible. So we sing at bedside for people who are going through life transitions. And it could be psychic pain, it could be isolation, it could be illness, and it could be end of life. We don't go as a choir to your bed, just in case you were wondering. We go in groups of 3, usually. We just sing in 2 to 3 part harmony. And the music touches everyone, not just the person we're singing to, but family and caregivers as well. And we don't go in with a set list. We don't know what we're going to sing. We have many songs written by Threshold Choir members, and we pay attention. We read the energy in the room. We look at what that person might need, if it's comfort or engagement or letting go. And we can tweak in the moment and be very present to what's coming up at that time. And this is nothing new. I bet many of you sing. We have always sung when somebody is born, for celebrations, for rituals, for strength together, for connection. So we're not inventing this, we are remembering it, and we pass it on and encourage everybody to sing. Our music, we kind of call sacred lullabies, but there's nothing religious about it. So perhaps you noticed something in yourself when we started coming in, or when we broke out into harmony. Music those sound waves really do touch us, and they can relax us, they can change our breathing, they can reduce our blood pressure, they can reduce our pulse, they can distract us from pain, bring up memories. Music is pretty magical. And sometimes it comes in where medicine can't go, it comes in another way to impact us. And when there's nothing else we can do, sometimes we can sing and bring in that level of comfort. So we sing we're partners with IVC, Island Volunteer Caregivers. We sing at memorials, we sing at vigils, we've done graveside services, we do an afternoon or an evening of healing song at Dialu once a year, wherever we're asked, wherever it seems appropriate. And we love to be invited to sing at bedside. So if that's where you might come in. So if you have someone, if you know of someone who might like 3 of us to show up, our services are all free. Don't let me forget to say that. And we can rally pretty quickly, sometimes within a day. And we are there to offer. We know that it's a very tender time and a hard time to bring in strangers. So maybe we'll be a little bit less strange after you've heard us and seen us. We also have a website. I have some cards we have some cards in the back. Please pick them up if you're interested. Thresholdchoir.org. Agate Pass. We have a new Facebook page. We're really trying to get the word out. So thank you. Ask questions. I'll be around. We'll be around for the evening, and let the music keep swirling within you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Threshold Choir. It's hard to believe it's our 4th and final week. We have progressed from before it's a crisis in week 1 to now it's an emergency in week 2. Last week, the topic was in it for the long haul. And tonight, we move on to the end is here. Now what? Here is Johanna Munson to introduce tonight's program.
I can't believe we've gotten to the end of this series. It's just been such a wonderful month of anticipating and experiencing and reflecting. And I hope that all of you who are online and all who have been able to join us here in person have been, changed by this. It's changed me in ways I can't even put in words yet. So thank you all so much for being with us. Tonight, we're going to have 4 speakers again. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then do a little death deck in between, and then have our last one. And then we will take a break and move to our tables. You'll see we'll tell you where to go for each person at the end of the speakers. And we do have an extra request of you tonight. We have a what's next form, right? We've been doing this for 4 weeks in a row, and I know maybe some of you are ready to take a break, but it's not the end for us yet. And so we'll be asking you to just share what you've enjoyed most, what you would like to experience next. So that'll be after the discussions, and then before we regroup to hear the highlights of what each group talked about, and then we'll wrap it up. So our first speaker is Danielle. Let me see if I can get rid of this. Here we go. There we go. All right, Danielle Gordon, End of Life Doula.
Hello. Hello. I've been on the Zoom side. Which way?
Gordon.
This close?
Yes.
I'm sorry that we did this to everyone else. I am going to read. I have to read so that I can keep my wits about me. Good evening. I am so honored to be here with you all, and hello Zoomers. I've been running the Zoom up until now. And I'm so honored to be here with the Threshold Choir. Their music is a gift for all of us, and especially for those of us in the midst of transitioning from our earthly life to whatever we each believe comes next. They say that it is our hearing that is our last sense to go quiet. So what a gift to have this beautiful final serenade. Creating these heartfelt, emotionally supportive experiences is what we at Edge Walking specialize in, and what I specifically hope to give to everyone I work with. My name is Danielle Gordon, and I am a death doula. Some folks also call it an end-of-life doula. The scope and breadth of the work is the same. I provide emotional support to the person who is facing the end of their life and the community that is supporting them. We have previously learned about advanced care planning with Johanna Munson, about having those heartfelt and challenging discussions of what we want at our own end of life time. And we will be hearing from Gaphni later this evening on the beautiful, heart-wrenching work of the grieving process. All of this work is part of the continuum of the death experience and process, and a death doula lies in the middle of these two other professional offerings. There are multiple facets of end-of-life care that intersect and overlap. A death doula is another member of a support team, in addition to a potential hospice team of doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains, and volunteers, and of course, family members. We are all present to ease the transition of the person and help support their community. And a death doula helps lead and support kind, calm, and open conversations about any subject matter that may come up, including fears, hopes, wishes, last words, life reviews, stories, and more. Dying is a major life transition. It can be scary to talk about death, whether it is that of a loved one or ourselves. It requires bravery, courage, patience, and a loving and present heart. I try to normalize the language and reactions and process around death because, as one of my recent readings reminded me, death is 100% fatal for 100% of the population. In many cultures all over the world, death wasn't perceived to be a scary event or something to try and avoid as long as possible. But in many Western dominant cultures, with our obsessions around youth and eternal life, some might say we have lost touch with the dying process. I aim to help rectify this attitude by creating beautiful and heartfelt experiences for those I work with. So let me paint a picture of the environment in which I would work. I'm sitting in a room with a terminally ill patient. I sit beside them after I have adjusted the lighting, lit any candles, or added any aromatic scents to the room that they have requested, as a way to create a calm and serene environment. There are family members present, they share stories, there are tears and there's laughter, and we all giggle together because someone brought up a funny story from this person's youth. I might invite anyone who wants to join in on a meditation that I co-created with the dying person as a way to calm nerves and ground ourselves in the present moment. I encourage anyone to hold their loved one's hand or stroke their arm. After we spend time with our family member, I might sense that they are getting overtaxed or tired from all the company or stimulation. So I invite all of us to retire to a different room where we too can have a snack or sit so that our patient can have quiet. Because I am a member of the patient support team, and because the hospice nurse and I have previously shared what physical and emotional symptoms can occur in the dying process, I remind family that dying is a labor, and that it is a sacred moment, and that the person might need this quiet time to keep transitioning. We all experience death in a multitude of ways in our lives, expectedly, tragically, quickly, or drawn out. And I am someone who has always been drawn to the bedside of a dying person. I have a desire to support, to be with, to listen or cry with, to hold the hands of, and to be silent with the dying person. I hold this space sacred. I didn't realize until a few years ago that this was not necessarily a typical inclination to be drawn towards the dying experience. Once I realized the power of the experiences I had had, I knew it was a calling. I want to quote one of my readings on death and dying that speaks to this sacred time. Is it possible to reawaken to the mystery of the world? This mystery does not lie in the hidden recesses of our imagination. It lies immediately before us. The mystery has never left the world. We have left it. We have done so by accepting the conventional ways we've been taught to think and experience. Sometimes people who are dying allow the mystery to return. They reacquire the innocent eyes of youth, and the mystery unfolds before them. The mystery, what a fascinating and remarkable way to think about this life event. A death doula can help at many stages of the dying process, not just during those final days and hours as I described above. And like Cheryl from Multicare Hospice shared with us last week, there isn't really a too soon or too early when it comes to including my type of support. A death doula can provide support at the beginning of a terminal diagnosis or when initial discussions start taking place about end-of-life wishes or fears and hopes. We can help with supporting the patient in the actual dying process, and we, of course, are able to support afterwards during the many phases of the grieving process. I can help conduct a life review where we take some time to mindfully and lovingly take a step back through time and revisit the stages of our lives from childhood to current day. I help celebrate the triumphs, and I hold a space for the accumulated losses and sadnesses. Death doulas can help patients find meaning in their life by writing down stories, finishing a legacy project, or recording memories. These can live on for many generations to come as a way to connect with our ancestors. And if the patient is not capable of doing these cognitive exercises, I happily work with the supporting community of family and friends to do a similar process as a way to remember their loved one's life. I hope I have conveyed to you what a death doula does and can offer you, your family, and your loved ones. There is talk these days about the good death and what that means for you and what it takes to support that vision. Creating a good death is not something that happens to us. It is something we actively engage in. It is an opportunity to be a creator of a sacred moment, either for ourselves or for our loved ones. Being able to help families experience the good death is the driving force behind what I offer, and I hope you are intrigued to learn more about it. Because ultimately, it is a doula's mission to assure you that you are not powerless. You have all you need in you and surrounding you. As one author stated, doula work is an act of sacred altruism, and I believe everyone deserves it. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, that was so beautiful, Danielle. Thank you. My father died in 2019. We hired a death doula who was in West Seattle, Johanna Williams, with a sacred passing. You may have heard of her. And I actually went and did death doula training myself with her. And then the pandemic started and I had to switch. And so it's been my dream to have a doula on the island, a death doula on the island. And so last summer, Danielle reached out to me through Melissa, actually, the organizer, and we talked and we started working together. So wonderful. All right, now I introduce myself. I get to speak again. I am a peace of mind guide, but I'm also what's called an ambassador for End of Life Washington. And we do, twice a month, we do these talks called End of Life Ready. And they're online. You can go to endoflifewa.org and sign up for it. They'll give you a much more in-depth picture of what I'm going to talk about. My topics are medical aid in dying and voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So why are we talking about this? Well, there's natural sort of running out of energy death, and then sometimes death is really difficult and challenging. Living is challenging, I should say. And so these are some ways to, as Danielle was saying, have some control over it. And so first I'll talk about medical aid in dying and then talk about VSED. So medical aid in dying is taking medication to end your suffering. It's a mix of medications that you mix up in some water. You have to be able to swallow. So you have to be able to lift the cup and drink, get it down. So it's not for somebody who's incapable of making decisions. If you're in dementia already, that you're not going to be able to do that. You can qualify for it as soon as you get on hospice, but you need at least 3 months to plan it. It's not something you want to try to do last minute. So why do people choose this option? Maybe there are no longer treatment options and they're in a lot of pain, or there's more treatment possible, but they don't want to undergo it. If you've already done 3 rounds of chemo or radiation, it's not fun to go through another round. So your quality of life is just not what you want. If you've done the values worksheet from End of Life Washington, anybody done that? Yeah, people who work with me do that. So that's one of the first things we do. You'll know what your markers are. I think I shared about my father. He first said if he was ever had to go in a wheelchair, that's it, he was done. But the last year of his life, he was in a wheelchair. So, but then he had a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety, a lot of suffering. He did not do medical aid in dying. Interestingly, about 25% of the people who go through the process to get the medications don't actually end up taking them, because either they die sooner or just knowing that they have that out relieves the anxiety. And when we're anxious, when we're not at peace in our hearts and minds, it's harder to let go and make that transition. So it's available on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, and out in Hawaii, Colorado, New Mexico. You can read those. Vermont and Oregon don't have residency requirements. And legislation to expand this is pending in 17 states. So in Washington, you have to be a resident. You have to be mentally competent, that you'll have an evaluation done at one of the 2 appointments. You have to have 6 months or less to live, so then you'll enroll in hospice. You make your oral request to one provider in person, wait a week, make another oral request. One of those will do the mental evaluation to make sure this is really what you're choosing to do. And then you have to make a written request that is witnessed by 2 people. And as I mentioned before, you have to be able to lift that cup and swallow. So nobody can hand it to you. They can hand it to you, but they can't bring it up. You can use a straw, but it cannot be assisted. So that's why we don't call it assisted suicide. I know that name, physician assisted suicide, has been tossed around a lot. Physician has nothing to do with it at the actual time when you're taking the medications. So what can you do in advance? Well, if you decided this is an option you want to have and you qualify, go ahead and start when you have 6 months or less to live. You need a provider. So talk to your own provider first and see if they'll help you. Not all can, not all are willing, not all are able because of the medical system they're in. So for instance, CHI Franciscan providers cannot be involved unless they are willing to do this outside. Now physician assistants and nurse practitioners can be 2 of the providers. It used to be only physicians, but there were some recent changes that went into law last summer. So it used to be 2 weeks between visits. Now it's 1 week. It's become a little bit easier. So then you want to decide where you're going to live out this time and make sure you have the conversations. And very important to contact End of Life Washington. They have what are called volunteer client advisors. And this is a person who's trained. They'll come and meet with you many times over the course of the time before you actually take the medication. And they can actually be there on that day. And if you're having a hard time finding providers, they can help with that. And there's also a fund, not End of Life Washington, but benefactors have come up with the idea that, yeah, this is not a cheap medication. So there's a fund to help cover that. So when it's actually the time, you got to choose the day, have a plan in place for what's going to happen after you die, right? What's going to be done for your body. And that's where someone like Danielle would be wonderful to have with you and have the just take time to pause, right? It's not an emergency. It's not a thing where you have to have the funeral home guys come right away or whatever's happening next happen. I've been present at the last moment of 3 of my parents and in-laws, not for my dad. But that just being there, and yeah, it can be difficult. There can be heavy breathing. It can be uncomfortable seeming breathing. It is labor, like Danielle said. And it is really, really sacred. So the compounds you take is a mixture of digoxin, diazepam, morphine, amitriptyline, and phenobarbital. If that doesn't do it, yeah. So it slows down breathing, it stops the heart. It takes about 20 minutes once you've ingested the medication. You take an anti-nausea medication about an hour before so that your stomach can handle all that. And so have your support team there, create your rituals, and then take the medication. So here are some resources. I will send these out in the emails. If you're in Washington, endoflifewad.org. Otherwise, go to Compassion and Choices for other states. There's a wonderful new movie available on Amazon Prime called Last Flight Home. And this guy was a pilot. That's why it's got that last flight. And it's evocative, right? But she is a filmmaker, and her father was suffering greatly and I think paraplegic, hadn't been able to walk for decades, and finally just decided it was time. And so he ends up taking the medication. So he's in California. All right, so that's one option, but not everybody qualifies for medical aid in dying. And so how many of you have heard of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking? Quite a few, great. Well, that's what my father chose. And when he first mentioned it, I was like, what? Why would you do that? But by the time we'd had conversations over 5 years and he was in a lot of pain, it made sense. So VSED is basically stopping all intake of food and water. It is a natural process, and our organs actually cooperate with us. Our kidneys shut down, right? With no water, there's nothing to process. And that produces, believe it or not, endorphins. Who doesn't like endorphins, right? And also natural painkillers. So it shuts down that. It's apparently, how many of us, we don't want to go there and practice, right? But from what has been observed, it is not actually a painful process. But that goes against everything we believe in, right? Food is love. We got to keep our loved ones going. But really, the kindest thing when somebody is at the end of their life, whether they're choosing this consciously or not, is to go ahead and if they're naturally not wanting to stop, not wanting to eat or drink, you can support them in that process. I've heard of, I had a hospice patient who was in dementia, and his son just kept feeding him, making sure the assisted living, the memory care people kept feeding him. We have another friend who's going through that with her mom, and a sibling, even though she had her advance directive in place, the sibling doesn't want to go along with that, and he has medical power of attorney. So there is a form with End of Life Washington called Instructions on Withholding Hydration and Nutrition, something like that. I'll put a link to that. So good to have that in place if you would consider this. So yes, if you're considering it, start now, start researching. If you think that is something you could do at the end of your life. I've got mine in place. So there are 2 scenarios where you might use this. One is the end of natural lifespan, and then if you don't qualify for medical aid in dying, or you're in a state where it's not accessible. So if you're and so some reasons might be because you have dementia, so that requires advanced planning. You have ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease or some other serious but not necessarily life-ending condition. And again, if you're not in a state where it's available. So organs wear out, right? Our lungs wear out, our heart wears out, everything gets tired, our brain starts, so it's natural. When people used to die at home more, this is what happened. They would just stop having an appetite and refusing food. And because there were more of us who were called to this work, somebody in the community would come over and they would help with that process. The family did not have to deal with it alone. Sometimes you just don't have the quality of life, or you're in significant pain that's not treatable. And this last point, the further treatment would postpone death, right? Not prolong life. We can put off death with so many different ways, surgeries and medications and trying this and trying that. But at some point, it's okay to say, I'm ready. So my dad was at that point. He was 86. He was in the wheelchair. He started talking about, where's my ticket? I'm ready to go. I need to go back home. And he didn't say Gainesville, Florida, where I think he would have considered home. But he just started talking about this nonstop. And so I was like, and he was anxious. He was wandering around the assisted living place. And so I thought, what can I do? I'm going to go get him a really plush animal from the stuffed toy from the calico cat, and maybe that'll help. So I got it. I came into the lobby of the assisted living place, put it on his lap. He picked it up and threw it. Now, if you know my dad or knew my dad, that was not typical of him. And so because we'd had all these conversations, because I'd been there the last 4 months, he'd been on hospice and just unable to do those activities of daily living. I said, let's go up to your room. We need to talk. And so we went up to his room, and I'm getting chills. Hi, Daddy. I asked him, are you ready to stop eating? Because he wasn't quite at the point where he would have suggested that, but I knew he was just beyond the point where he was wanting to keep living. And he was quiet for a minute, and he said, I think so. And then I had to ask him, are you ready to stop drinking? Because drinking is what really does it. It's what shuts down the body. And it took him a little bit longer, but he said, I think so. And I didn't push it. I said, okay. He had dinner. He had chocolate cake for dessert. That was a Friday night. And the next day, he just stopped. And he was a very, very determined person. And so because we had had the conversations, my sisters and I were all on board. The assisted living, used to call it the Mark, Madison Avenue, Madison House now, I guess. They were supportive, and it took him a week. It can take 2 to 3 weeks, depending how healthy you are when you start. But we had the swabs. So, we had all the support from hospice. So yeah, it can be up to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks is normal. These are just some more information. I don't want to go through all of them, but the periods of unconsciousness will increase. He was aware for about 3 days and then went pretty much into a coma. And I wasn't there when he took his last breath. I was at co-housing with my younger sister, and I woke up. He woke me up, I would say. And I started singing to him. Now I walk in beauty. Beauty is before me. Beauty is behind me, above and below me, or whatever. Yeah, over and over and over again. And then about 15 minutes later, I got the call from the nurse. And so he was an introvert. I don't think he would have wanted us there. He knew that he was well taken care of by the staff. Yeah, so let's just pause a minute and do a little shakeout like Kathryn showed us, right? This is a lot to take in. So everybody just raise your hands up, shake. Yeah, It's a choice. It's not for everybody. And we are here to support you in that. We have people who can sit vigil with the Edge Walking Collective. We have, there's wonderful, actually, Bainbridge Island has the highest percentage of medical aid in dying patients in the state. So we're very aware, we're very informed, and now you're even more informed. So some resources, this will be in the recording and I'll send out the slides. There's a wonderful group in Bellingham called VSED Resources, and they have a book, the VSED Handbook. There are TED Talks about this now, and of course, reach out to End of Life Washington. Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Dorothy about planning for this time of life through estate planning.
I'm humbled to be following this. I feel you are my peeps, though. I say I'm in the death business all the time. When I'm meeting with clients, they will often talk to me and like, we're doing retirement planning, and they'll say, no, I'll need that. And every week I say, no, you'll be dead. So what I'm talking about today, I wrote up some materials real quickly last Thursday. I apologize for the typos, but since our topic today is last minute, I want you to understand there are some last minute things you can do regarding your assets and your finances. So, which is what we call estate planning. So I want to start out with some myth busting, because I hear these myths all the time really quickly. I know I only have 10 minutes. But it is not the case that if you die without a will, the state of Washington takes your money. Our intestacy statute passes your assets to your family. So no spouse, no kids, they go up to the family tree, up to your distant relatives in Finland I had to handle once. It is not the case that you need to avoid probate in Washington at all. Our probate system is inexpensive, simple, private. There's just a judge sitting around in case something goes wrong. So probate in my office and in my experience is much less expensive than the probate avoidance mechanism that we read about from Susie Orman, which is a revocable living trust. It's absolutely not necessary in Washington, nor should you do one. It's not the case that when you're married, all your assets belong to your spouse. We're in a community property state. That just means everything you earn during your marriage is deemed to be owned 50-50 regardless of title. 50-50 means you own 50%, and when you die, you can give your 50% to your dog if you want. Yes, we can do trusts for dogs in Washington. So it's not a requirement that you give your assets to your creepy spouse. It's also not the case that you cannot give more than the gift tax annual exclusion. That's the number that used to be $10,000. It's now 18. The amount you can give per person, per year, per recipient, per year, under the table without having to report it to anybody. That's just the gift tax annual exclusion. But we now, each of us, have a gift and estate tax exclusion of $13,610,000. So if you want to give somebody more money, you absolutely may. You just have to file a little gift tax return saying, dear IRS, please deduct this $100,000 from my $13,610,000 exemption. That number is going up probably about 200,000 next year. And in the following year, that number will be cut in half unless Congress does something. Congress never does anything. The last myth is that it is not the case that you can go be a signator on somebody's bank account. The financial institutions became subject to know your customer rules about a decade ago. So it is not possible for somebody to sign on your account. So if you bring your kid in to the bank to put the kid on your account, that kid becomes an owner. And furthermore, the teller doesn't tell you that when you die, the account goes entirely to that kid, not your other children. So do not put a kid on your bank account. Instead, use a power of attorney, which I'll talk about. Real quickly, so a little bit of law. Washington has an estate tax. It's a death tax. There is no gift tax in Washington. So we'll talk about that in conjunction with end of life things you can do. Federal capital gains tax is important to keep in mind because your capital gain on all your capital assets disappears when you die a resident of the United States. When you die having been married in one of the 9 community property states, the surviving spouse's half of your capital assets also gets this capital gain disappearing. So a capital asset is something like your house or taxable investment accounts. There are other assets we have that have income tax inside of them, deferred income tax. And those assets are income in respect of a decedent. Those assets can't really be gifted away, and they have to be addressed differently and separately and outside of your will. If you don't address them properly outside of your will, you're going to create an income tax problem for your heirs. And finally, there are a bunch of laws in all other kinds of states and countries that address taxation and who you can give your assets to. So if you've got assets in another country or heirs in another country, you absolutely have to address those laws. You can't just write a Washington will. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about durable power of attorney, which I know you learned about before, but what I'm talking about is things you can do last minute. And you is usually the agent, that's the word now, not attorney. In fact, they jettisoned that word in 2018. So your agent is often doing things for you to help you manage your assets properly and make your estate administration simpler. So that agent has to act under a properly drafted durable power of attorney. So the durable power of attorney statute, as I said, changed in 2018. So if your power of attorney is prior to that, then it's invalid. Well, I mean, it's wrong. But yes, a financial institution might pay attention to it. Many financial institutions won't pay any attention to a power of attorney that's more than 6 months old, believe it or not. So we have a statute that you should also be doing. That's a little certificate that your agent signs when you do become demented. And yes, I say dead and demented in my practice too. When you do become demented, that agent signs a certificate saying, cross my heart, hope to die. I have authority to handle this person's assets and you, bank, can sue me. So not only do you need a durable power of attorney, you need this certificate of agent, it's called. So regarding end of life planning that are running around quickly trying to do stuff at end of life regarding your assets, your power of attorney has to be drafted to allow the agent to do stuff. So the most important thing that they need to be able to do is to make gifts. And they have to have the power to change beneficiary designations on your retirement accounts. They may not ever change your will. So they cannot call up an attorney and have a will drafted for you. But they can change your beneficiary designations. They can establish a new trust, move your assets into the trust, and the trust has beneficiaries. So they can actually override your estate plan. And that's what most of the lawsuits under Title 11 in our state are all about, is abuse of fiduciary duty under a power of attorney. So your power of attorney needs to say that the agent has certain powers only in accordance with your demonstrated estate plan. Okay, so they'll be making changes last minute and making gifts last minute only in accordance with your estate plan. Now, regarding making gifts, the fact that Washington has only an estate tax and the exemption is rather small for those of us who've been living on the island too long. The exemption's $2,193,000 per person. And The federal gift and estate tax system has an exemption, as I said, of $13,610,000. So if you, and I have two estates going on right now where the person died with $2.5 million. If they'd only called me up and said, what can we do or what should we do? I would say gift $400,000 away in accordance with the estate plan. So the power of attorney has to have the power to gift above just the gift tax annual exclusion. It has to say that. So let me say it another way. Our statute does allow gifting only if the power of attorney says there may be gifting, and the statute says, but it's limited to 18,000 per recipient, unless explicitly indicated in the power of attorney. So that's why your power of attorney has to be drafted properly so you can do this end of life, or the agent can do this end of life stuff for you. So the kinds of things that need to be done are fixing beneficiary designations that should not be there. So remember I said some assets have capital gain and some assets have income in respect of a decedent, deferred income tax. So the assets that have deferred income tax are retirement accounts of all sorts, annuities, and all of those have a very big tax hit if they don't have a beneficiary, because the beneficiary just defaults to whatever your will says, and your estate has to pay tax, income tax, at a very high graduated rate. An estate pays income tax at 36% at about $1,800 of income only. So if you have a retirement account of any sort or an annuity, those beneficiaries need to be written on the company provided form for every single retirement account from every single company and given to the company and confirmed before you die. So this is the thing that often does not get done because people think I did my will. Your will does not and should not address those assets. So the will addresses your capital assets, assets that have capital gain in them, and your tangible personal property and your cash. So in other words, your will should address your house and your taxable investments. Your taxable investments should not have an optional beneficiary designation on file, which is called a transfer on death. All kinds of financial institutions, when they fired their trust and estate departments in the late 90s, encouraged their clients to avoid probate by putting transfer on death pieces of paper on their investment accounts. But what that does is fail to eliminate the capital gain. I can't get the financial institution to step up the basis on the asset to the date of death value. The heir ends up with a capital gains tax. So then, only have one more minute. If you're acting as an agent under a power of attorney, you, as I said, could become part of a lawsuit. So what you want to do is contact the principal's attorney. Say, she's dying, what do I do? And that attorney, in overseeing you, can be the witness of what that person's estate plan was and help you with all of these. If the person had no attorney and you have a power of attorney, you can go get an attorney to represent you as a fiduciary, just so you don't screw this up and end up in a lawsuit. That's it.
Dorothy is so knowledgeable. She was handled my dad's estate. She's got mine. She's busy, so get in line. But yeah, there's it's just like I call myself peace of mind. Peace of mind is having your estate planning done. So thank you so much. Let's do a quick death deck. So have you ever been with someone while they were dying? Have you ever been with someone while they were dying? How did you feel? A, at peace, they seemed comfortable and ready to let go. B, disturbed. It's a visual I'd rather not have. C, unknown. I have not and would like to keep it that way. Has you been, so A, at peace. How about B, disturbed? Unknown, don't want to do that. Oh, thank you all so much for not choosing that one, because as I've said, it's an honor. It's a sacred honor to accompany someone through that time. And we learn a lot about ourselves. And yeah, there's just something changes in the room when that living force leaves the body, and to be present for that is it's amazing. And if the person decides they'd rather go when you're not there, that's up to them too. So that does happen. All right, our final speaker this evening is Robin Gaphni, who does wonderful grief support.
Thank you, Johanna.
Sorry about the wait.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I am the last of the last 4 days, so I appreciate being here. Grief is, well, I guess I kind of want to start out by saying we do not do grief very well in our culture. It is, it's almost a taboo subject. People don't like talking about it. They don't know what to say. You get 3 days bereavement leave when you work at a company, and then you're expected to get back to your life, and yet your life has changed dramatically. And 100 years ago in the United States, when somebody died, people would wear black for a year, or they'd wear a black armband. They weren't expected to go to parties. They were treated with compassion. And they weren't expected to be who they were before the person died. And that's not the way it is now. But I have good news. Bainbridge, we have a lot of grief support on Bainbridge Island, specifically through Island Volunteer Caregivers, which is who I work with, as well as with Blodell. So I want to talk about IVC's programs specifically. First of all, they've been offering grief support groups for about 20 years. And I've been leading grief support groups for them for 12 years. And I want to tell you, when I first started leading the grief support groups, they were called open-ended drop-in groups. And that's what I got. And they were held up at Rolling Bay Presbyterian Church every 2 weeks. And I'd be sitting there, and then whoever entered the door would come through, and there we'd be. And it was a resource. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it was really scary for the facilitator because you never knew who was coming through. So I started training with a man in Colorado, Alan Wolfeld, who's a psychologist, and learned a lot about grief. And I learned a lot about what it was. And I learned something called the companioning model, which is very much like what the Thresholds Choir saying, we're all just walking each other home. It's about companioning people on the journey. It's not about fixing their grief, because you know what? You can't fix their grief. And so I pretty quickly changed the model of the grief support groups that IVC did to a closed model, meaning that there was a beginning, a middle, and end. I started off doing 12-week programs, and we followed a curriculum, and it was much less anxiety producing for me. And we would develop these wonderful kind of cohorts of people that would move through together. And I think it was, I know it was really a good model. And the companioning thing is also, it's not a therapeutic model. This is peer led. I have been trained, but you don't have, you're not a therapist. That's not the purpose of the groups. It's also to help normalize, and it's also to help teach about grief, because there's a misconception that there's 5 stages of grief, That's not true. And that isn't even poor Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That wasn't what she was talking about. That had to do with end of life stuff, was not about the grief. Grief is messy. It's not orderly. It's not linear. You can't say, oh, it's going to be a year and it's going to be fixed. You just don't know. And so we like to say there's 2 stages of grief: who you were before and who you are after. So in 2019, I was approached by Bloedel Reserve to see if I'd be interested in helping co-facilitate a grief group in the Japanese guest house. And I said, really? Yes. The reason this came about, why Bloedel was doing this, is that they have a wonderful program that they developed in 2014 called the Strolls for Wellbeing Program. I don't have time today to tell you about it, but what I will tell you is that what they found is so many people that were going through the Strolls program had some loss. And so at that point, Virginia Mason was involved with Bloedel for the Strolls program. And they said, well, why don't we see about doing a grief support group to address the people that are going through the Strolls. And they approached a retired Virginia Mason psychiatrist, Ted Rainerson, who had been leading grief groups over in Seattle. And he said, yes, I'd love to, but I need a local person here. So I got to be the local person. And Ted and I we got together and we created an 8-week program that is there's a curriculum you're moving through. It's deliberate and it's compassionate, and we have 8 people that go through at once. There's a little bit of grief teaching in the beginning, but if we've done our work well and we hold the group, then the group takes on its own force and they companion one another. They hear each other's stories, because so often that it gets lost. You don't get to tell your story all the time. And we've been doing that since. And up there we did Zoom grief groups during the pandemic, but thankfully in 2021 we were back in the guest house. So last year we trained 6 new facilitators. So now there's many of us who are capable of doing this, and we offer 4 groups a year, 1 a season, and they're full. We do have a waiting list, and they're free. I do want to say that they're free. And just so you know, there are at least 2 other faith-based groups on the island, one through St. Cecilia's, one through Cross Sound. We're not faith-based, but there are other options. Bainbridge is well set for grief support. And there's more. In 2016, IVC developed another program for grief support called Compassionate Companions. And Compassionate Companions is the one-on-one grief support group. So again, peer-led. It is modeled after a program in the Bay Area called CARA. And 2 of our volunteers came from the Bay Area and brought it to us and said, what do you think? Do you think IVC would want to do this? And we said, yes, we would. So we trained our first cohort of facilitators to do that back in 2016. And what that program is also being a sounding board, being a good listener for someone, because what happens when someone dies, and if you're lucky, you've got a great community and you're swarmed and people bring you everything and they're so wonderful. And 3 months goes by and they go back to their lives, which is fine. That's what they're supposed to do. But you're left with your loss, and you still want to talk about that person, and you want to be able to have somebody to talk about. So what the Compassionate Companions person is that they can be there for you to talk to a year later. You can tell them the stories that you kind of feel like you don't want to tell your friends again how much you miss that person. So it's a great program. I love it. And the beauty of the Compassionate Companion program is that people will come forward and they can get a companion right away, whereas the grief group, there is a waiting list because we have a waiting list. And actually, to be honest, you don't necessarily want to do a grief group in the early months because you're pretty raw, you're pretty numb. And so, but a companion's a good way to have somebody and then get into a grief group when one becomes available. So, hold on, I didn't even look at my notes. I'm sure I've left out something. Oh, well, one thing I do want to say about Blodell holding it there is that whole being in nature part of it is really, I think, an important part of the whole group, because I know for me, I lost my son, and after I had, when I was in that first year and nothing felt right, really being outside was about the only thing that felt right, and really being outside on a cold and rainy day even felt better than not. And so and then you know what happens? Spring comes, things come up again, and like you see that nature comes back, and that's kind of what the grief process is. It helps you recognize your place in the world. So that's why I love being able to offer this program at Blodell is a real gift to the community. So, and that's Blodell. And Blodell and IVC have a partnership for the grief groups. And then the Compassionate Companion program is a specific IVC program. Hopefully that makes sense. What else? Oh, yeah, we have this new, one more minute. Oh, we have, okay, a new resource. If you go on Finch Place, which is where IVC is, there's a little mini grievers library outside of grief books. So if you know anybody, and there are children's books on the bottom for griever, and there's adult books, and it's just a sweet way of another resource. So, and before I end, I would like to read a quick poem. We do a lot of poetry in the grief group, and it's called The Antidote. And I think it kind of sums up the IVC's approach to grief support. The best medicine you can bring for sadness is not joy. It is not telling them that they need to move on or get over it or realize how much worse things could be. No, the medicine for a spirit in mourning is tenderness and warmth and compassion and connection and presence. Sit with someone in their grief and let them cry their ugly tears. Do not shine and scurry grief away. They must walk through it. This is love. To abandon all that we think we know and be so full of grace that we are invited in to partake in someone else's darkest moments. What an honor it is simply to be a light. The antidote for sadness is love. It's always love. Thank you.
I want to go be in a group just to be with you, Robin. Your presence is so wonderful. And I can just feel that relaxing, that like, okay, it's going to be okay. Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Well, we are going to take a quick break here. How much time do we have? Or
Just a few minutes break.
yeah, like
and move as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
Our 4 groups full, and then you describe what's going on.
yes. So there'll be a speaker at each of these 4 tables. I'll be over here. That's Danielle with Death Doula, and Dorothy Foster will be at that table, and Robin will be here. So unfortunately, you can only be one place at a time, but we will have somebody taking notes, and then we'll regroup to hear the highlights. So we're going to talk for probably 15 minutes. If you rush and get there, you can have 20. There is a request, like I said, we're going to ask you what's next. What would you like to see next? So those papers are on the tables. Get your pen out, and we'll call you back when it's time for highlights.
we're coming back together, excuse me, in our groups. And we on Zoom are welcome to begin to share maybe what surprised us tonight, what we loved. I have to say tonight was very rich and left me with wanting to know more. So at this time, I invite you to unmute and also put your cameras on if you'd like and participate in a chat. If you are there, you might still be on break. And this is Kathryn Lafond, and I am an intuitive energy healer, health coach, and spiritual guide. And I spoke on the second night of this event. And what I notice is once we put our cameras on, our names are disappearing on this computer. So I apologize if I don't know who I'm talking with. But if you'd like to have a bit of a discussion, go ahead and start your video so we can see each other, and also unmute.
It's pretty overwhelming. There's so much information to take in.
Isn't it? Especially, I would say, from the attorney.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
That was really complicated, and I felt that what it was saying, what I was hearing was, we really do need to update our wills regularly because laws keep changing.
But I had a will done not too terribly long ago, and a lot of the things she's mentioning were not even talked about. So even it's like, oh my goodness, where do I get even more information? It'd be really nice to have a more detailed class on just all those aspects of the will that people need to consider.
And I don't know that anybody's offering that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole business too about end of life, the dying, and the medically assisted or the voluntary, not drinking or eating, just what those procedures are too. That got covered pretty quickly too, and I don't know, I'm not quite sure about all of that. Do we get access to a recording on these? I can't remember.
Yes, you will.
Okay.
Right. But in regards to that information on estate planning, each speaker only has 10 minutes. And so it's really challenging to get very far in that 10 minutes.
Well, it's sort of nice, I guess, if this series is looked at as an overview, and then like you're saying, well, what topics do people want to explore more, and then hopefully do sessions that just cover, longer on certain topics.
I'm noticing we've got a few things in the chat. People agreeing that having more information about estate planning would be very helpful. And that it certainly, I think, it made us feel a bit overwhelmed to catch some of the pieces, because she just is so full of wisdom in regards to that seeing what's most important and what you can crowd into 10 minutes is very challenging. Anybody else have a comment about maybe the end of life doula work? Have you ever considered having an end of life doula, or are you familiar with that term even?
I'm still not really sure what exactly it is that they do. I mean, I thought of it like a doula, like for having a baby, the doula is there. And I don't get with the death doula that is a person that comes and sits with the dying person over, long periods of time or anything. So I'm just not quite sure. I know they can have discussions with family and the person who's dying, but I'm not quite sure what else or how it works.
It's as Danielle said to us, that you can begin that process with working with a death doula quite a bit earlier when you know of your diagnoses, especially if you're heading into hospice and it might be a few months. Many people like to do a life review, or they like to design a celebration of life, or they need guidance in regards to how do I meet this, because I am a fighter and I'm being told to give up the fight. The death doula comes into to be that emotional support, especially for people that don't have that with their own families, or they don't have a significant other. It can be an invaluable aid in those final hours, as well as final months. Anybody here familiar with death doulas, or have you had any experience with hospice, for instance?
I've had experience with hospice, but before the death doula concept was active or, had appeared on the scene. But in hospice, we did have a spiritual guide and, kind of the healthcare nurse practitioner who was in charge of health. And we had person who came to shave, person who delivered the drugs.
Your bathing person.
Hey, what else? I don't know. There were many, many amazing. Oh, yeah. Anyway, amazing people. And I think maybe the spiritual guide was as close. Oh, there was also a social worker, that sort of sorted out who was going to do what to support my husband.
And
But,
there's a chaplain often, a chaplain.
yeah, that's what I mean. The spiritual guide wasn't really, chaplain I think of as maybe having a religious deal, but this spiritual guide was really didn't adhere to a specific, religion, but was definitely a guide for those aspects of living and dying, and was a wonderful help. So I think that person was as much a death doula. My daughter has kind of functioned as one in a different death. And what she talked about as being her main function was sort of orchestrating who came to the side of the person when. And that was partly according to the need of the person that was dying, but, also taking into account who was in town and this and that. And I think that could be a really helpful function. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as she did mention that it takes a lot of efforting to die. It's work, and that in that support of the patient, you want to help them feel like they're not powerless, that they have some control. So the death doula takes in what that patient wants, what their desires are, and tries to hold the space for that. And I know many families get pretty crazy, so it's nice to have someone not in the family.
Yeah. Loved ones are all in their own, emotional place. So it could be helpful to have someone who's good-hearted and, perceptive and sensitive, but not so out of whack.
Yeah, someone that monitors the energy level of the person that's in the dying process, that can help hold the space as sacred for them, can honor their wishes. And as you mentioned with your daughter, kind of monitor the room. I recently had my sister cross in early February, and we had times where one of their sons was in the room playing music, people were singing, music was playing, a loud conversation and lots of laughter. And we know that our sister would love that. And then we'd have a caregiver come in the room because she had been ill for quite a long time. So she had caregivers, and the caregiver would want to shoo us out. And she sometimes played that role of the death doula, the person monitoring, so that there would be a balance, both the ritual of a family coming together and also the piece that's needed to do the heavy work of getting out of one's body. Yeah. We are very fortunate in our state to have options in that dying process when people are in such awful pain, or if they have history with family members, seeing families members go through terribly awful deaths that were just really really challenging. And so as more of these types of illnesses come into the picture, that we are very fortunate in our state to have some options, depending on people's beliefs, with the VSED and the MAiD or MAD, as I used to know it, medicated assisted. Yeah.
Yeah, just to think, I'm thinking about that, about the two types of dying, assisted dying that she spoke of. But in hospice, I think it's pretty standard procedure to administer. In our case, I was given the job of administering morphine, and how much I administered was really up to my discretion as to what I thought my husband needed. And so that's maybe a little milder but similar approach to the end, approach to orchestrating the end. It'd be wrong to say that it wasn't orchestrated, but compassionately,
Right.
because the pain of many illnesses is so beyond our capacity to endure.
And anybody been at the bedside other than yourself, at the bedside of a loved one when they're actively dying? Yeah.
My mother.
I've been at the bedside many times now, and find that every death is different, and each person's case is quite unique in how they might be responding to that task that is given to us at the very end of life. My father had a lot more physical motions going on as he was getting to the end of his life. And my sister was pretty immobile. There's much that we could discuss to make people more conscious that it could be quite a bit different from one death to the next. Yeah. Another thing that I've been involved with is the Death Over Drafts group that Edgewalking has hosted here on Bainbridge. And we have found that lighthearted questions help people embrace what their death might look like. That we've gotten amazing discussions on, and both laughter and tears that rise up from the stories that people are sharing of their experiences. And I remember one evening, one woman said, "Wait, I thought we were just going to talk about other people's deaths. I didn't think we were going to talk about our own." And she was really taken by surprise that, yeah, we want to begin to think about our own in a positive sense so that we can discuss it, so that we can meet with our estate planner and get the paperwork done and not keep pushing it off until all of a sudden it's nearly too late. So trying to develop some positivity around the topic, I think it enriches how well we live life when we get that opportunity to make death part of life, to make it a conversation that we can visit. And so we've had 4 weeks of discussing these things. Have you been on all 4 weeks? You have. Uh-huh. And sir, could you tell me, have you found this to be kind of a enlightening in one sense?
Yeah, of course. I'm just trying to think.
We're gonna come back to your.
I guess I have. Short answer, yes. Thank you so much, all of you, for your work. It's been a privilege to be ending.
All right, we're gonna start with our highlights.
A couple of things came up in our small group. One is that we've been talking here about when you know that the dying is already in process, but what happens if it's sudden or there's an accident? And we learned that it's possible that let's say I'm the one that has the spouse or someone I'm with who dies like that, we are empowered to slow the process down. And that's when we can enlist the aid of a doula if we wish, and he or she could be they're mostly women, aren't they?
There are men.
He or she can be our spokesperson and help the person honor the process and make a ritual. And what I found most interesting is that a doula can also be very helpful and useful in post work. For example, 2 or 3 months later, the doula could come back and have you revisit what happened as sort of like an interview and what happened then and how are you feeling now? Different from grief counseling, a different type of support, but a very important one. And then it was asked that we've heard that IVC's grief counseling has no charge. Danielle, and I imagine most doulas are professionals. They've received professional training and there is a fee, but she wouldn't turn anyone away. As of now, there's a $95 per hour fee. First consultation, there's no charge, and you'd make a plan.
Obviously, if you've decided that you really would like her there for, 20 weeks, it's not going to be $95 now. We can talk about a package, but there is a fee. And someone in the group said, well, I'd sort of like to talk to you now, but it's going to be, the incident I feel is going to be in the future. And she said, that's fine. It's a perfect time. Could be years in the future. The initial conversation can be whenever. And then the other important thing to realize is who is hiring the doula? Is it the patient? If the patient is fully conscious and so forth, or is it a family member? But in any case, it needs to be clear. Did I
That's
say that right?
beautiful.
Okay.
She's a pro.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So we were talking about VSED and MAiD, and Maria will share.
Yeah, we had we shared experiences with people that we knew who had gone through this, and that was interesting to discuss, having been with people who participated, and found that sometimes it wasn't so much pain that caused people to decide to end their life, but more just the quality of life, that it was just too trying to kind of deteriorate. And one person who chose VSED didn't qualify for the medical aid in dying. And she really was quite vibrant, but she wanted to end her life while she still had that vibrancy. And it turned out that it was very emotionally trying on the survivors, because she, still had so much life, still so alive. But, it was really her choice. And she did a lot of planning ahead. She really have to do, and made time for her family, did some traveling. So she was very conscious and intentional about it. And to be aware that VSED can be very emotionally challenging for the people that support the person going through it, or hard for children, or it might be hard to accept or support someone, especially if they are vibrant and full of life and just making this choice because they know what they're facing. And we talked about how it would be so helpful if we could normalize the discussion about it, to make it easier for caregivers and support people to accept and really offer a person this empowerment of choice, where they get to determine their own end of life with dignity and quality. And we had a lovely end to the discussion talking about this hope where there could be a home where people could go outside of medical facilities, because there's so many complications with choices when you're involved in the medical industry, medical facilities, and the limitations and restrictions and the bureaucracy. And sometimes the institution won't support either of these processes. So that's the dream, is to have a place, a retreat, a place where people could go to end their life with comfort and support and empowered to make their own decision. And to be able to support each other and having more conversations about this so that it's easier for everybody.
Thank you. And next, Dorothy, and you're. Yes.
Mean questions.
I'm sure most of you felt the way I did. Oh, good. I'm sure that most of you, at least, I've talked to some friends that feel that we got a tremendous amount of valuable information. So I asked Dorothy for 3 takeaways. And the very first one is, make sure you read carefully your durable power of attorney, and make sure that it is robust and it follows the statute. And she has this fabulous handout over there that you can pick up that explains how to look up the statute and everything. The second thing is, look at the value of your assets. And if they're over 2 million, and assets include everything, your house and your IRA and everything. If it's over 2 million, get rid of the stuff that's above 2 million. Give it away, do something.
Consult with your attorney and CPA about giving it away.
Okay. And the third thing was to check the beneficiary designation. It has to be drafted well. It has to be very clear exactly who the beneficiaries are. And what I didn't realize that every single account that you have every company has their own form, and you have to use their form. You can't there's not a standard form. And the best news is from Dorothy is that she's giving free estate planning in, I believe it's May.
When are we doing that?
May
At the
18th
senior center.
at the senior center, and also one at Barn and also one at St. Barnabas. So
Those are April something.
so thank you.
And Robin, and your.
Robin's going to start with something that she meant to tell us. And
But I
now
ran out
she's
of
going
time.
to.
So another kind of program that evolved after the grief groups is the Widows Walking Group at Blodell. And what that is it's for lack of a better word, graduates of the grief support group Widows. And it's led by people that are compassionate companion facilitators. So there's this great kind of intermixing between IVC and Blodell. And they meet, it's a really powerful group. And there's a couple people here tonight who help lead it. And they meet next week. They're starting for 2024, and they'll meet every other week through October for a walk at Blodell. And it's a wonderful joining of various cohorts of women from the last 4 years that have been doing it. So that's something that I forgot to mention. It's kind of an informal group, but it's really great. So, and
some other highlights from our group. One, notice that it's called the Widows Walk, and Robin is recruiting men. Almost all participants in the grief groups are women, but that's only by women and men choice. They'd love to have mixed groups. Robin said a typical group would be 6 widows, 1 widower, and 1 who has a different loss, of a sibling or somebody else that they've lost. That's the typical. Again, there are 4 groups each year, and contact for those is through Robin or IVC. But then there are 2 faith-based groups on the island, St. Cecilia's and Cross Sound Church, that also have grief groups. So for resources, there's some more.
yeah,
Oh, here we are. I feel just so many different emotions. It's a little sadness that I'm not going to see you next Wednesday. What am I going to be doing? I don't know. Relief that this has been so well received. I have to thank Joe and Patricia for actually bringing us together, and Joe for having this vision. All of you who have attended and contributed, and we use the zero waste Bainbridge mugs and cups and all kinds of things, and delicious cookies, and it's just been a coming together, not to mention all our wonderful presenters. We've had I think 12 or 13, so covered a lot, and I can still think of some more that we didn't include, and so maybe next round we'll include some different ones. Hearing the Threshold Choir today was so amazing, really set the mood for our last session and just that idea that we are walking together on this, and none of us will escape, but all of us can make something of this. So I'd like to end with a poem by John O'Donohue, and it's called For Death. From the moment you were born, your death has walked beside you. Though it seldom shows its face, you still feel its empty touch when fear invades your life, or what you love is lost, or inner damage is incurred. Yet when destiny draws you into these spaces of poverty, and your heart stays generous until some door opens into the light, you are quietly befriending your death, so that you will have no need to fear when your time comes to turn and leave. That the silent presence of your death would call your life to attention, wake you up to how scarce your time is, and to the urgency to become free and equal to the call of your destiny. That you would gather yourself and decide carefully how you now can live the life you would love to look back on from your deathbed. Yeah, so many people have written such beautiful things about this, and so that poem really, really touched me to think about loving the life that you look back on from your deathbed. So I really, really hope that you will stay in touch. You will be on my mailing list, so I don't send lots of emails, but I really appreciate when you read them, and we'll be on putting programs together based on your feedback. And please reach out to any of us. All of us offer free consultations, so we're happy just to sit down and talk with you and hear what's on your minds. So, oh, I hate to say goodnight, but thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all on Zoom. It's been so great to have you here too.
Thank you, Johanna.